we have a special treat today. We have a friend of mine for, I think, at least 15 years. We were trying to figure out exactly when we first met, but for quite a while, since back when Andreas Weigend was the chief scientist at Amazon and helped make them one of the most data-driven and experimental-driven companies on the planet. It's worked out very well for them. It's also worked out well for Andreas, who is now teaching at UC Berkeley and also at Fudan University in Shanghai. He's been doing a lot of work, continues to do a lot of work on social data and experimentation, and really being an evangelist, one of the most well-known evangelists for this. And he's distilled a lot of his wisdom into this book here, which I haven't read yet, but I'm sure it's really interesting just based on what I know about him. And you all have copies of that here. But what we're going to do today is, rather than have a one-way presentation where he just says stuff that you could probably read in the book, we're going to make it much more interactive. And Andreas really wants us to hear from you about some of the data challenges, the data problems, the fluky things that happen, the privacy concerns that you have, the great things that happen where you got something amazing because of data, and use some of those stories as launching points for our conversation. So I'm giving you a little bit of fair warning so you can think of a really weird or interesting or juicy story that you can share with us. While you ponder that and background process that in the foreground, you can listen to me and Andreas talk a little bit about some of the issues. I'll start with a data story that I have. One of the times I realized that big data and analytics would be very powerful was probably about 15 years ago, about the time you were at Amazon, maybe even longer ago actually, about that time, when the recommendation engine started getting really frighteningly good. And I remember one time in particular where they recommended this book called General Purpose Technologies to me. And I was like, oh, it seems interesting. I clicked on it, went ahead and bought it. It was a pretty expensive book. I think it was like $90 or $100. Luckily, MIT paid for it. But that was a very powerful instance of them, of me seeing how data and analytics could add a lot of value to me. Obviously, it added $90 to Amazon's revenue as well. So it worked out for everybody. And I'm sure Manuel was happy also to sell another copy of his book. But at the same time, now I think more and more, the wonder is turning into concern because these same big data analytics, can be kind of creepy in terms of some of the privacy implications and people, organizations knowing more about us than we really would like them to know about. And for a lot of Americans in particular, having the government have that kind of access to data is a bigger concern. When I go to Europe, it's kind of the other way around. They're more worried about the corporations having the access. But either way, there are people who may not have your interests at heart who now are able to make decisions and take actions that may not be in your interests because they have so much more data. So I gave you a good example, a good story, a bad story. You can pick one or either, or probably synthesize them in some clever way.
Yeah, so let me pick up on that. So I'm Andreas Weigend, and what is interesting to me is Eric's comparison between Europe and the US. The other day, the CFO, the Chief Financial Officer of Deutsche Telekom, visited me. And a friend of mine brought him to my house. And after he got over that shock, that I asked him whether he would mind taking his shoes off, because I have a house where people don't wear shoes in the house. I might have just asked him whether he could take his pants off from the reaction. But we didn't go that far. So he said,
you don't have that kind of a house.
But he then said, oh, man, it is so difficult, this transition always between Europe and Silicon Valley. In Europe, the question is, what if the worst happens? That is what he gets evaluated, bounding the downside. In the US is, what if the best happens? A focus on the upside.
Because the worst has already happened here.
I hear that we are not even a scientist without a talk anymore, or something like that. So I think that's very interesting. If you think, some people might here be in finance, you are thinking about the distribution, what weights do you put on the different parts of the distribution? And I think that is really what I want to bring to this forefront. That data, all right, data will when I was at Amazon, maybe one more story. When I was at Amazon, Jeff Bezos and I spent probably 50 hours trying to write down fitness functions, as we call them, for the different teams. And it really was an exercise in creativity of figuring out what all might we measure. For instance, when you said recommendations, would we just measure how many people click on the recommendation? In that case, a story like Mother's Day when I was at Amazon would be appropriate. At Mother's Day, the front page at Amazon, in the top left, I think we can talk about this, right? Featured a vibrator. And people might be wondering, how did a vibrator end up on the front page of Amazon? And the answer was, well, you see it with many, many different items, and you see what people are clicking on, as Mother's Day is the examples. There were gloves and a coffee maker and whatnot, and there happened to be a vibrator. So everyone said, what? Take this, and boom, it shut up and made it on the front page. Of course, screenshot in the New York Times, all this. So those are examples of, using data to surface things. Yeah.
So you adjusted your function afterwards?
So the example would be, thank you. An example would be, do we want to just measure who clicks? Then that would be the best success story. Would be the example, the conversion rate, how many people click actually buy. Would it be the gross merchandise value? So those are all questions which are important. Would it be just the fact that somebody buys at all? Would it be the time they come back the next time? What do they buy the next time? How much do they buy the next time? So all these are just in this very small element here of how do we write the fitness function for the recommendation group. Those were deep questions. Now, that principle of writing down an equation, that I think really is underlying how I see the world, how I see data, and that's why I use the term post-privacy economy for data.
So are the media behind where Amazon was in terms of being able to update their fitness functions?
If somebody makes a call to the call center, is that a good thing or bad thing? Okay. More interesting, if somebody makes a second call about the same case to a call center, what about that? And that's where we said, this one we can't do by first principles. This one we actually do instrument. So we instrumented the call center, and the second agent had to make a judgment call saying, was it that the customer is simply unreasonable, or was it that the first agent might have not quite, solved the problem appropriately? And then immediately you collect statistics about which agents you should fire and which customers you should fire. And customer firing means, your call is very important to us. The average wait now is 7 hours and 53 minutes. Please hold the line.
Yeah, they won't come back. But on the revenue thing, the question is, how do you measure that?
So right now, it is not about really how Amazon measures revenues. What is important is that concept of an equation. And I want to give you a different example. Mm-hmm. Organ transplants. Some very smart, well-meaning people got together a couple of decades ago at the Mayo Clinic and wrote down an equation with different terms: quantity of life, quality of life, how much contribution has the person made in the past, how do you measure contribution, how much are they expected to make to society, and so on and so forth. And they wrote down an equation, it's called the MELD score, Mayo End of Life Disease or whatever it's called score. Mm-hmm. And I love that they make things explicit. Rather than just going by the gut feeling and saying, I just sign an executive order who gets the next liver. It would be actually very advisable to figure out what are the values we have. So for fairness, I think we now have all the data. Assume everything is recorded. Now the question is, what do we do with it? And I feel that the most important step for people like us is to think, what fitness function, what fairness functions do we want to create? But the other example I wanted to give about data, the good and the bad one is, so my dad spent a few years in prison in East Germany because they thought he was a spy, an American spy. And after he died, I wrote to the government because they then had released the Stasi files, the files of the secret police in East Germany. So you could write to them. And
but this was after the...
After 89.
Yeah,
yeah.
Right.
It was about 10 years ago.
Yeah.
So you have to document who you are and so on and so forth. So I followed all of that and I sent it in. And then I got letter back saying, we're sorry that the files of your dad were destroyed to protect, the informants. But since you asked, here would be the cover sheet of your own Stasi file. And the day they started this was when I was a grad student at Stanford. And being Andreas and doing crazy things, I decided, I should say, I lived in a trailer. The three of us lived in a trailer together.
Housing's expensive out there.
Yeah. So we decided to invite the general consul, the consul general of East Germany, to our trailer for dinner. Because we got here, there's some money, $100 or so, you can invite somebody once a quarter. So that was pretty cool. And that's when they decided we need to start the file on that. And now, you might think that those experiences would make me an absolute fan of data protection, of doing whatever we can to make sure that our data we create as little as we can. And I see why people think that, but last but not least, having been at Amazon, I realized just that we have no chance. That is the sort of battle we maybe thought about fighting 20 years ago.
We have no chance to protect our data.
To protect our data.
So it's, what did Scott McNeely say?
Exactly. Scott McNeely, you have no privacy, get over it.
Exactly.
And that was in probably 98 or something like that.
Right. So you're with him.
So I am with him, and I would, however, take it one step further and saying, now let's embrace that the data which we create is unavoidable. As we breathe, basically, as we walk on the street, some camera will pick us up. As we have a phone here, the base stations, even if you turn GPS off, the base stations can triangulate who sit next to whom and probably So it's just amazing. We have no choice, I think. As we breathe, we create data. Let alone, I took a lift to get here, and if
the lift, you mean the car?
Yeah, the car. Yeah. If you get into a cab, and the cabbie says, "Where may I take you?" and you say, "I'm not telling. I'm not giving up my data here." That ride isn't going very far. Or if you Google but you're not telling Google what you're really interested in, it's again harder. If you go to Amazon and you don't tell Amazon, or even if you order pizza to your dorm room but I'm not going to reveal where my dorm room is, that pizza is not going very far. So I think that those necessities here made it clear to me that rather than trying to minimize the data we create, let's maximize the upside of what we can get. And so that's why I told the story about the CEO of Telecom.
Well, can you do both? I mean, not just the data you create, but also minimize the downside of how it's used.
Yeah, that's where I had to function. What weights do you put on those things? And what I see in the EU is that the weights are entirely shifted on the downside, minimizing downside. So I think that's the framework, how I want people to think about it. It is not black and white. So anybody who makes those, binary claims either hasn't thought about it or has thought about it, and
So are there things that we can or should do on either of those, either to increase the upside for as an individual, or to bound the downside so that it's not?
Yeah.
I mean, presumably there's some basic
Right.
security things. You don't want your data to
Yeah.
be available to hackers to steal your bank account.
Yeah. So absolutely, and that's why I wrote down those 6 rights I think we should have on our data. But I think this was just the longer story, and what I want to do now is I would like to go through the room and see, after I told stories and Eric told stories, a personal story, it can be short, of something which really surprised you about data.
So let's hear some of your stories.
Yeah.
I'll start.
All right.
So I have 3 credit cards. I used to use them roughly equally. Now I really almost exclusively use American Express because I find the best analysis of fraud. So I've gotten 4 calls in the last year where they suspected that somebody had misused my credit account. In 3 of those cases, they were correct. In 1 of those cases, they were not. And I wouldn't have cared if it was the reverse either. When I use my Visa card, and they would call me up and say, we suspect fraud, they would end the call by saying, and would you like to buy this, or would you like to buy that?
And did you find that the Visa calls were more likely to be just erroneous? Or were
Well,
they?
I think they needed the trigger, but they still took the opportunity to solicit.
No, I don't mean that part, but in terms of the accuracy, were they less accurate or more accurate than American Express in terms of when they're?
Neither better nor worse.
Okay.
So my story on that one, just to completely agree with that point, was I was in Russia. I met with Putin in November last year, and they have this sort of,
Now you're on the CIA list.
I also wanted to meet with a gentleman, which we just refer to as ES, and I got an email from the hotel where I was staying that the gift my students had made for ES hadn't been picked up yet, and what they should be doing about it. So it's fine. But what I want to say is I was in that VIP lounge, and they take your passport, so you really, have no choice there in Moscow. And I was hungry, and we all spent lots of time in lounges, so I thought I knew how lounges work. And I had to have some food, and they said to have a sandwich, and okay, I had the sandwich. And then as the flight was boarding, they said, oh, you still have to pay for it. I said, okay. And I gave them my Amex card. And the transaction was not approved. And, that's
This is for
weird.
the sandwich?
It was sandwich. A
Okay.
sandwich in Moscow on a black card. I thought, I've seen other things in life. So I then pulled my United.mit.edu card, and that got approved. And at that stage, I said, we need to go, plane's ready to leave. Okay. And then I get back to my concert. Andreas spent $460 at the airport. Is this business or first one before tax? I did what? I bought a sandwich. So Amex knew that place has probably had chargebacks. Visa blindly processes a lounge fee of $460 and waits for dispute, but doesn't learn from the data the same amount. All right. So why don't we? I promise to be quiet for a moment and just list these stories. Is that a deal?
Yeah, let's have a few more stories.
Like for 30 seconds.
Go ahead, George.
So related to the David one, years ago, I'm the third in my family. I'm George the third, and I went to get a mortgage. And I was turned down for the mortgage. I got excellent credit. I was like, what the heck's going on? They said, well, you've got undeclared debt. And it turned out they had my father's mortgage also and a couple others under my file because we had the same name. Situation, just a problem, and we had to fix that.
And how do you fix wrong data?
Yeah.
So I think it's a very interesting one. I was at Google, and Hal Varian and I did sort of storytelling. And then one story was this pump and dump, that somebody buys shares hoping that, they will go up and then dump them. And then, long story short is, if it doesn't work, they call Fidelity and say, or whatever the brokerage is say, I did not make that trade. And then, of course, they always say that if it doesn't work out. So how do you fix wrong data?
And it's the letters and all kinds of stuff saying, yeah, this is a legitimate mortgage, it's just the wrong person, right? And so
How do
So
you?
did they have your social security number or other like unique identifiers?
That's eventually how we worked it out, but it took a
Mhm.
good 3 weeks to fix it while I was applying for a mortgage.
Yeah.
Now, that was a while back. One that happened just last week, though, I think is fascinating, both on the interesting and the creepy side. I met a guy who, he and his wife had just done 23andMe.
Uh-huh.
And they forgot, they put stuff in, they forgot about it, and he got a call from his wife and said.
From his wife.
From his wife.
He called.
His wife called him and said, "You'll never guess, we got the 23andMe results back, you'll never guess." And he tried a few things he couldn't guess. She said, "No, actually, I have a sister I never knew about.
Sister. Wow.
Sister I never knew about."
Whoa.
They also knew it was through the father, and
Whoa.
so it set up a whole set of conversations.
Whoa.
Boy, and 23andMe revealed that information.
That is interesting.
That's interesting.
And
yeah.
it also gave them the option to talk to each other or not. But
Right.
yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, that's a.
That's an amazing story.
Well, great. Let's get another story, Daniel.
My cousin did this. Found out that his grandfather was actually a Venezuelan man, and not the Russian guy that he thought it was. So what had happened was he gets back that map of where your genes are from, and it was all Latin America and Spain. So he asked his mom about that and said, "Oh, my mother had a friend who she spent a lot of time with from Venezuela. Nobody ever thought anything of that. That's weird."
Cool.
So yeah.
So who was the Venezuelan guy?
A friend of his grandmother. Yeah, very close friend.
A very good friend. Yes. Love that.
At least at one time.
Not my side of the family, I'll clarify. Yeah.
Lots of questions here.
I have a story that's similar to this name story and the mortgage story. So I was married in 2015, and we went to buy a house like 6 months ago. We sat down to sign all the documents, right? And you get to this part where they say disclose all of your identities, and I had seen on there that they had changed my name for me, that I was Christy DeLuca now, and I've been Christy Cole all my life. I didn't change my name when we got married. I made that decision. And so I saw this and I was very kind of offended. Like, how dare somebody or some algorithm go ahead and take my name and alter it and create this other identity that I didn't even know existed. So, I mean, one question I have then for the group is like, well, what about algorithms and data reinforcing things like, you know, traditional gender stereotypes or gender roles
Did you
or
find out how that
inequality?
name got changed?
No, I have no idea how that came about. I don't know if it was an algorithm or a clerk or, you know, somebody who saw that I got married and decided that, well, now I'm taking my husband's name, you know, but that really made me sort of aggravated.
Yeah.
Can I just ask, was that a private institution that made that name change for you?
I don't know. They, like, it was something that came out from their credit report, I guess.
From the credit report.
So,
I just want to, this actually leads me to something that a lot of comments seem to be going to. It's not so much a question, and it actually comes from my habit of reading detective stories, but there was one passage in one of these fictional works where there's a CIA person supposedly talking about cell phones and saying, you know, we adore cell phones. Can you imagine, this book was written sometime in the last decade, and she says, can you imagine if 15 years ago, government had mandated that every single citizen in this country wear a tracker around his or her neck that says where we are, that says what we read, what films we go and see, what our, you know, when we buy Tampax, whom we speak to, whom we are friends with, whom we're even acquainted with. Can you imagine if that had been mandated by law, the outcry? And here we are now. And my question is, you know, I mean, anyway, not getting into my own, I don't have a smartphone, okay? For this reason, actually. Not just because of this book. But all I could think was, why are people so willing to give up all of this information to private corporations or companies? I mean, it seems that they feel as though a 50-cent coupon at Walmart for your Tampax, you know, makes the payoff worthwhile. And yeah, and it seems to me to go back to this notion of data for the people or data against the people. Somehow there's this notion that if government has these data, the government will use it against the people, whereas somehow corporations are so loving and giving and nice, they'll just give us what we want and what we need because that's best for us, which seems to me to be totally screwy. Anyone have any comments on this?
In today's Wall Street Journal, where the book is discussed, they picked an order of magnitude calculation. I'm very happy that actually, the physicist thinking comes through, which was against Lanier, who has this book called Who Owns the Future?
Oh, right.
And it's, we should all get paid by Facebook and by Google because they are using our data. So,
Geronimo.
yeah. And so what I did is I look up the profits Facebook makes. Let's say a quarter. And I say it's roughly 1 billion people who use Facebook.
Billion users, yeah.
Yeah, 1 billion users. And so if I divide 4 billion by 1 billion, the answer is 4, which is about a cup of coffee a quarter. So sometimes it is worth understanding, when you scale, that the whole really is more than the sum of its parts. So I rather have Facebook knowingly and willingly than a free cup of coffee. Now, one way to think about this, and that's John Taysom, who used to work at Reuters, who first told me that is, think if you did not have Google, how much would you pay to actually get it back? So it's hard to argue with you. Think if you didn't have a smartphone because you don't have one. But if we all think about it, what is the value of having basically the world's information at our fingertips? The trade-offs. People should make the trade-offs the way they want. And I personally actually think why they write the book, to actually empower people to make those trade-offs in an informed way, that they know what they are risking and what they're getting.
What are some of the costs of losing privacy? I can think of 3 categories of costs.
Yeah.
Maybe you've thought
Great.
about this more.
No.
So one is in the short run, people can do things against your interests, like you don't get as good a price on the hotel room or whatever because they know you have a black card, or maybe the other way around. I don't know. The second thing is sort of the long-term tail risk. Right now we don't have a totalitarian government, but we could we could imagine.
I haven't read the paper today yet.
We could imagine I know, you got to check after lunch. We could imagine that having all this information out there, it makes it a lot easier if at some point someone wanted to reconstitute the Stasi. It would be infinitely more effective than the last one in terms of the data it had access to. And right now,
but I
we
read
think the
yesterday,
intentions aren't there.
As The Economist, that Trump is believing in torture. I mean, seriously, I read this.
Right. No, for instance, exactly. So you could say, okay, right now we aren't experiencing the specific costs, but it creates a tail risk by having this out there. So that's a different kind of cost. It's not something you can quantify today, but there's a risk. And then the third is, I think there's just a lot of people that even if you set aside the economic short-term or long-term or the other things, there's a sort of a creepiness factor. Some people just don't feel comfortable having other people know a bunch of information, even if they can't point to a specific thing that changes in their life from the knowledge being out there. It's a more psychological thing. And those are 3 categories, but are there others? And how would we evaluate that set of costs, as Naomi obviously is very concerned about, versus you described a set of benefits?
So when Eric set out and said there are 3, I expected him to say, well, we know 3 things about people. People are greedy, lazy, and horny. So I expected you to lay it out along those 3 dimensions. And the lazy aspect is for many of us why we use things, or officially we would call it productivity, I think.
Okay.
I think the short-term versus long-term is interesting.
Mm-hmm. The risk, even if it's not realized yet, as far as we know.
I think it's tricky because we are not good in assessing risk. I just had dinner last night with Danny Kahneman, who is one of the people who has thought a lot about how people make decisions. And it is very difficult, I think, to know how to deal with risks. and to try to have people make this explicit. I mean, I hate financial. So, there's these people who do finance, who advise you, and there is a certain pattern when you talk about timescale and about uncertainty. 2,000 years ago, it was the high priests in Egypt. Long timescale for predictions, like 7 years. And clearly, whether the floods of the Nile come or not, I mean, there is some stochasticity. Then we had, doctors in the Middle Ages, bloodletting. Well, we don't know what's happening now, but in the long term, we're good. And now we have these financial advisors who say, I'm sorry that, I lost 90% of your money last year, but in the long term, you'll be good with it. And what I love is companies, both here but also in China, now breaking open that door by making the data of the people and by the people, data for the people. Mike Shah, for instance, he went to some other school around here, just forgotten Harvard or something. He worked in payments at Amazon when I was there, and then started a company called SIGFIG. SIGFIG stands for Significant Figures. And what I love about the company is that he does not need the acceptance of the institutions of the brokerages. So I have an account with Wells Fargo, and what drove me nuts was when they blocked the IP address which SIGFIG used. I gave them my username and password to get to my account information. And then they said, Andreas, you can talk to your chief information officer. I would love to use your rate supply. So it's fascinating for me how username, password, and now this little company with its room about this size, they know more about the inner workings of brokerages than probably the brokerages know themselves. By people sharing the data and allowing to get stuff back.
So we're just about out of time here. I know there's other people. So right in the back here, let's get some quick questions and answers, or comments and answers.
Thank you. Just a quick question. I'm over from the Kennedy School of Government, and what drives astronauts over there is basically how do you govern this? And everything that comes in there also related to public opinion. I mean, we made it clear. Before going to the Kennedy School, I was at the European Parliament, and we tried to enact the data protection regulation. That was a mess because there was a massive backlash against the kind of, like even just knowing what was possible was almost impossible to legislate on it because there was so much at stake for people, and they wouldn't even know that basically companies would be collecting all of those data already. So how do you govern in that atmosphere anywhere?
Good question. Yeah. So if we do manage to answer it in the group, maybe we have a couple minutes afterwards so we talk.
You want to take a first cut?
I think we should listen to another
Other questions? Maybe a question.
Yeah, and one thing that hasn't really come up so much yet, not so much the fact of the data, but the fact that algorithms build on that data to assume or to ascribe new data. I mean, pretty much in the case that Christy mentioned. And one of the problems that seems to be really prevalent right now is that, if you're working from data sets, from some historical data sets, there's patterns in that are not representative going forward. And so people face biases because these algorithms are basically learning from historical settings.
Or they
sort
may,
of people
as
being
Christy was saying, they may embody some other historical prejudices.
So how do we get around that, or how do we put more thoughtfulness into the algorithms and the machine learning, so it doesn't just get sort of run forward without any kind of
Let's go ahead and gather a couple more questions, and then you can amalgamate them.
You mentioned sleep rights, and I don't think I know what sleep rights are.
And anyone else?
Just very quickly, you mentioned about the Shanghai identity Chinese, and I just wonder how language plays right now in the data world. And I was reading a fascinating report basically talking about Saddam Hussein was captured and interrogated at CIA. Basically, the two translators from CIA and military, they were arguing against each other. And this is not what he meant. And basically, that guy sort of trying to arbitrage in between the two translators. I mean, of course, data is subject to interpretation, and this varies a lot. And in this kind of world, do you think actually as a language, like English is mostly popularly spoken, is this really advantage or disadvantage?
So let me use this to land. So I was, some other story was I was disposed, so I had to, say things in court. And they had a court recorder, and being Andreas, I say, oh, I'm recording it too, and pop my MP3 recorder in front of me. He said, no, you can't do this. I said, why not? If you record it, I record it. Sure. This notion of Steve Mann, who was here like 30 years ago, basically invented wearable computing, of surveillance.
Right. Right, now a lot of police are wearing
very interesting
body cams.
And you are recording the police, recording
vice versa,
the most interesting about China, however, is the multiple, the experiment which we right now witnessing, social credit score, where Alibaba, empowered by the government, constructs an equation for each citizen, where each action adds or hurts your score.
Well, it's like the FICO score that somebody used for mortgages, but now it adds on the social.
Yes, like whether your child can go to good school, whether you can get a job. If your score is below a certain value, sorry. So that is the other experiment which I think I personally find fascinating, because I do spend a month a year in China, is WeChat versus Facebook.
Yeah, like saying the mother-in-law would check, the guy's that
social
score,
credit score.
Yeah, see if that's a good score for my daughter.
Yeah, right. Yeah, right.
Something like that.
So I think we are living in a time where if we are open and we are interested in seeing what's going on in terms of these experiments on a global scale and reflecting upon them, just seeing how these WeChat versus Facebook absolutely diverge based on just some simple assumptions. And then, that's the last point I want to make, I think it's about social norms that determine many more things. There's the legal thing about privacy, that you don't want to have your illegal activities put up on the web, but more importantly, I think, is the social norms. So one thing we discussed last night was really the role of secrets. How do secrets define themselves? Shame. But I know that will be reported forever. That will be invited back, and that I don't know what happened.
Right. So unfortunately, we do have to end here, but thank you very much, Andreas. That was really terrific.
Thank you for having me.
Fun having that conversation. So there's the book. Get a copy if you haven't already. And Susan, oh, here we go. So next week, no, is it March for Bo Kaugel? Okay, so the next speaker is going to be Bo Kaugel on March 1st. There's a chance we're going to have one before then. Is it on the 16th, or are we still? Okay, watch your inboxes, but definitely put in your calendar March 1st for Bo Kaugel from Columbia, who actually is going to pick up on some of these themes as well.
Bo actually was my student, and
that's right,
he and I had a conversation on Sunday evening at Columbia. So you can smoothly, all the questions I couldn't answer, you can ask Bo in progress. Yeah.
I think he probably will. He has lots of good answers. So
and
great.
Thank you again.
Thank you again. It's great. All right. See you guys at lunch.
And I'm still here if you have questions. Super happy. And thank you for your stories.